this might sound simplified, but we're all going to die. And if we talk about that and work backwards from there, it's almost like let's put it away, let's hide it. It's not going to happen. And it is.
This is How to Care from Nurse Next Door. I'm Sarah Stockdale. There's a part of caring for people that we don't often talk about. We see death as a final punctuation mark at the end of the story that is a life. But that's too simple. Death is part of the final chapter of that story, and I don't know about you, but I want my story to end with a grand finale. My final act is going to be just as enjoyable as the gripping scenes in the middle. So today on How to Care, we're talking about the end of life and changing how we approach it as a society. Our time on Earth is precious, so we should be celebrating every single second. And we should be talking about it, because if we don't talk about it, how can we ever improve it? As the leader of a care company, the final stage of life is something that Cathy Thorpe encounters more than most people. It's a part of our lives that Nurse Next Door wants to make happier and not to shy away from. After all, happier aging has to apply to every single moment. It's a part of working for Nurse Next Door that Cathy and the company need to support caregivers through when they face losing the clients they care for. But the reason we chose to make this episode is that recently Cathy has found a new perspective on end of life. She's just been through all of this, and losing someone so close to her taught her a lot. So we wanted to share those important lessons with you. Tell me about your husband.
Oh, Harry. Yeah, he was my husband for 19 years, and I met him while I was living in Germany. I had just turned 30, and I fell in love with him the first day I saw him. He became my best friend, and we spent 19 years married.
You fell in love with him the first day you saw him? Tell me about that day.
I fell in love with his happiness and joy for life. He went after things. He went after life. He went after happiness and joy in every aspect.
Tell me a little bit about the day you found out about his diagnosis.
We dropped him off at the hospital at emergency, and I had to take my daughter to her dance recital. And he sent me a text 3 hours later saying that they had found cancer and that he needed to have an emergency operation that day. And they had to remove part of his colon, and because it was blocked and it was very serious. And so our world was a new world.
It sounds like it was pretty serious from day one. Did you know how serious that diagnosis was on that day?
Well, they had said that it had spread to his liver. And I would say at that time, my husband and I were very naive. You hear about cancer and how people navigate through it. I think until it hits you, you don't really know what's going on. And as you go through the process, as we did for 2 years, you learn a lot that no one could have said what it was going to be like at the beginning.
And how is he? How is he doing in those early days?
I will say for the 2 years that Harry, from the time to diagnosis till when he passed away, he had hope every single day, and just this incredible attitude that the simplicity of life was what gave him happiness, and his family gave him happiness, and just the small little things that he appreciated every single day he got up.
And so for those 2 years that you went through with Harry and with your children, were there any things that you did to cultivate hope that could potentially help someone who's experiencing something like this right now?
I think for us, hope was about living our lives and not letting cancer lead us. We led it. We led our lives. We led our happiness and joy. And yes, cancer was part of our life, but it didn't define our life. And I think that was a really important decision that we made, in that we saw that Harry had a chronic disease and we were going to live accordingly and add, doctor's appointments or medication or whatever those things were that he needed to go through. We were going to add that into our life. but we were going to live our life.
Can you think back to a couple of questions that you have used in these hard conversations, whether they were with Harry or your kids or people that you work with? What are a couple of those questions that helped you get into that vulnerable space and have those hard conversations?
Thinking back to the conversations with Harry, eh, it was always, what's important to you? What do you need? What are you looking for from me? How can I support you? It's digging and also making sure that you didn't, throughout Harry's illness, there was always different levels of where he would go because he always had hope. And I never wanted to take that hope away. So, how do you ask the questions and allow the person to decide how deep it's going to go?
Oh, that's so important. Not taking away the hope while still having the hard conversations. That's hard.
Yeah, it is because you just have to be really sensitive to what the answer is and know when to go deeper and when not to.
So, can you tell me about one of those conversations you had with Harry?
Yeah. One that really stands out for me was I really wanted to talk to him about our kids and what dreams did he have for the kids, and how could I make sure that I honored that. I remember he said to me, he's like, I trust you, and whatever decisions you make for them, I know that they're the best ones. It was really giving him the opportunity to, I guess, reflect and be thoughtful about what he wanted. I don't remember going into too many questions because I wanted it to be about him speaking and his thoughts and just getting his perspective.
Oh, how do you prepare for something like that?
I think for me, it was always, am I going to be able to say these things without getting too emotional? Because I didn't want it to be about that with Harry. I wanted it to be about him and what he wanted.
I always think about myself, and it's such a human thing to center your own experience, right? But you're very much focused on, what does the other person need for you to be taken care of in those moments?
Yeah, because I can't imagine how hard it would be to go through that and to. I was always struck by the loneliness that Harry must have felt. There was no one else going through this. It was him. He was experiencing the sickness and the loneliness. If I could just help take that away, that's what I always wanted to do.
Absolutely. Can you recount any of the periphery hard conversations that you were having at that time? Perhaps, when you told folks at work or with a friend who you were leaning on?
One that really I remember as I was trying to help Harry just with that feeling of loneliness, I think I was also experiencing it. I don't think I was as conscious of it. When I look back now, it's like, oh, yes, that was also lonely. But I remember a friend, he said to me, we were talking through what was going on, and he just looked at me and he said, we will get through this. And it was just that word we. It was so helpful. It was so, I didn't feel like I was alone. And it gave me that, I guess, that power to be able to go and continue helping Harry and continue going through this and continuing to be there for the kids and all of those things that I needed to do. But just that word of we really stuck with me.
That's so beautiful. Like just something so small that someone can say when you're in so much pain that says, I'm standing here with you and I'm not going to let you be here by yourself.
Right? It was so powerful.
We're having this conversation relatively soon, and grief is an ongoing process. And you very open about having these conversations, and they're tough conversations to have. Why do you think we as a society struggle so much to have these conversations about end of life?
I think they're tough. I think they're sad. I think when I think of Harry and I having those conversations, for me being the one still here, it broke my heart. And I wanted to make it better for him, and I couldn't. And I think in many ways, that's what people are doing when it's hard to have those conversations. It's everyone has the best intention. I think it's just really hard to navigate and figure out what the best thing to do and say is.
From this experience and from kind of everything that you've built with Nurse Next Door, is there something that you would say to people if they're trying to navigate these conversations and they're trying to be more honest about end of life conversations? What advice would you have for them?
I think that we have to really, we talk about happier aging, and then I get into this whole conversation around happier aging till the very end. And if you want happier aging till the very end, you have to be in all of those messy moments with all of the hard conversations. Otherwise, you're not going to experience those moments of joy the same way.
Yeah, there's an honesty there. There's a vulnerability and an honesty in having those real conversations about end of life. When I think about happier aging specifically and kind of moving into the discussion about Nurse Next Door, it's almost like in our society, we hide people away when they're approaching the end of their life, or especially in their old age. There's a fear there where we're kind of separating people and hiding them. Why do you think that is?
I think in many ways, people don't know what's going to happen. There was almost more of this fear of what's he going to go through? How are we going to navigate this? And there's so much unknown. And looking back on it, it's like, oh, he was in life up until he couldn't be. And that really was close to the end. And I think, wow, that's to me happier aging, because we had to adjust our life, and he certainly couldn't do as much as he could do even, 3, 6, 9, 12 months ago. But as you adjust, he's still experiencing happier aging and life and joy. It just might look different. And I think it's not having this mindset of it's time to lay down if you don't want to. You can stand up and you can do things. And, I remember 2 weeks before Harry passed away, he walked down to the water and he sat on a bench. And it brought such happiness to that day. And that to me was his happier aging.
At Nurse Next Door, I feel like you are starting this. You are making this a priority. You've centered a business around it. In general, as a society, what needs to shift for all of us to start thinking about end of life like this?
This might sound simplified, but we're all going to die. And if we talk about that and work backwards from there, it's almost like let's put it away, let's hide it. It's not going to happen. And it is. And you can be thoughtful and real and in life and in the conversation, or you can pretend and put it behind a closed door. And how do we start opening that door and get into the conversation and know it's going to be hard and do it anyway? Because the other side of that is the incredible experiences that can come from that.
When you think about the end of your life, as you so astutely put it, like this is an organic process. We're all on our way to some other place. What do you want that to look like?
I think where I go with it right now, having thought about it for the amount of time that I have over the last 2 years, is that I want to experience as much as I can in life. And when I do get sick, to keep on living how I can and not stop, but just keep going.
I love that. Like, this doesn't end until it ends. How are you bringing that into your work with Nurse Next Door?
Yeah, I think it's how do we just be in the conversation and help the organization continue to define happier aging, to embrace happier aging, and to make sure that it's a philosophy that we not only teach, but there's a deep level of understanding. And I think for me, it's sharing stories. And, you said this is getting into this conversation today, for me, is about sharing a story. And yes, it's a hard, raw story. And at the same time, for me, I love to share the story because that's how we all can connect with each other and relate to each other and just be humans together.
I believe it's incredibly important to have these conversations. I want to know why you were open to having this conversation. What preempted that you were going to be so, I think, brave in talking about this so soon after?
Because I've watched what the world has gone through over the last, months. And it's this search for what's important in life. And to me, I've been able to experience that at a deeper level, having gone through what we went through these last 2 years. And I want to be able to share that. And I want to be able to bring that story to life.
Yeah. I think they're the very same way that we talk about hiding people at the end of their life. There's also a lot of hiding of grief and hiding of what people have been through in the stories that are shaping what they're bringing both to. And I think it's important for your work for people to understand that you have this lens that can be incredibly, I think, comforting to people who are potentially going through something similar. And I know as well to the people who are working at Nurse Next Door, like they are also going to potentially lose clients and have to be in this place of grief. What are you working through with, your franchise owners and your caregivers? What are those conversations like when you talk about losing clients?
Yeah, I think you talked about not ignoring it. It's what happened, and how do we make sure we're in the conversation about how people are grieving and what they need, and listening to what they're saying and making sure that we provide whatever it is that they're looking for to be able to move through these moments.
And how do we create more of a culture where people, even at work, feel like they can have these hard conversations and be in these conversations where they put up their hand and say, I'm grieving or I'm experiencing something and I need support? What are the things that you do culturally that, makes that a safe space for them?
This organization, people that I work with every day, went through the grieving process with me because they opened their hearts and supported me through something. And that's just being human. And I think when you can have an organization that makes that recognition that humans are showing up to work and working together, and that you're all going to go through things and life's journeys, and how can you be there for each other as you navigate through all of that?
I've recently been reading about CEOs talking about, work isn't a family, it's a team. You can't fire your family. Like, there's a little bit of a coldness to the way that some organizations have been speaking about work lately. And it sounds like you have a little bit of a different lens.
Well, I go back to human and, I don't know, family, business. It all intersects together. Humans that have dreams and goals, they all show up at work. And when you're in those conversations, the word family, when I hear family, to me, it's like, is that where people mean soft or not real, not honest? To me, it's like you can have all of that and still be a business that is driving results and working to get better every day. And I don't know, I think you can have it all.
I like what you said about softness, because I do think that a lot of the time people want to remove some of that human vulnerability from work. They want to take out some of that softness and make you, this hard kind of corporate version of yourself. But I always think like people bring their whole selves to work. And especially doing the kind of work that you do at Nurse Next Door, like you want them to bring them their whole selves because that's what's going to connect to the clients. That's what's going to develop those relationships. And it's hard to say bring this part of yourself, but leave those other parts at home.
Bring what's not messy. Like I think of myself and it's like, oh my goodness, it's been messy for me. and when you have the opportunity to still come into work and you're fully embraced in however that is, that's pretty special. And we learned so much through Harry, and I've learned so much with my experience of walking into work and really being connected to incredible people.
Can you tell me a story of an end-of-life celebration that you can point to and say, this is how this should be done? This is what living to the very end looks like.
This is beautiful. So a client knew she was at her end of life, and she had decided that she wanted to navigate that her way. And she spent every day making little cards. And little cards for loved ones. And she filled a room, and she ended up doing a number of those cards for a lot of the nurses that came in to help her. And it was just incredible, the things that, A, how beautiful they were, and B, what she said, and just the impact that she had on all of those that received one of these cards. And for me, that was just beautiful of how she was going to leave just that memory of her and just put that smile on a lot of people's faces.
Oh, that's so loving. Like, that's such a loving way to spend your days.
Right. And she wanted to get out of the hospital. She wanted to go home, and that's what she loved doing. That's what she was going to do. And that's what she did.
If you were talking to someone like me, perhaps, whose parents aren't there yet, but, at some point, I'll have to have these conversations. What would you tell me to do to just start preparing now?
I think when you start with yourself, we look at age as that indication of starting to have the conversations, but there's many examples of people very young losing their life. And I think when you can stay in that place of here's what's important to me, if something happened to me, and then you're allowing that other person to open up. And so you may be the younger one, but you still, if you've thought about those things and you are saying, here's what that means to me, I think it just creates a conversation.
Like if you are willing to be vulnerable about that conversation with yourself, you open the door for someone else.
Exactly. And then it's not about age, right? It's about here's where we are in this moment of time, and something could happen to me, and here's what I've thought about, and here's what I want. And I think, then it's not about age, right?
Yeah, it takes away the one-sidedness of what those conversations could potentially be. Two people being vulnerable together versus someone asking for vulnerability and not giving it in exchange.
Yeah, it brings everyone into the conversation.
If there is someone that's listening to this who's maybe facing the death of a loved one, what is the thing that you've learned that you think would help them the most?
I think, how do you live each day in the moment and cherish all of these times, and don't leave anything unsaid. Say it all.
I'm so grateful that Cathy was willing to tell us this story. It takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to share something so recent and so painful. And yet, I feel like there was a lot of joy in this story too. Because as the best stories are, this is a story of love. And grief is evidence of love. Grief is also a teacher. It taught Cathy so many rich lessons that she shared with us today. how we need to be vulnerable with the ones we love, how we need to not hide from death because it's the only truth of life any of us can rely on. And when we've accepted that, we can have those hard, important conversations early. Instead of making assumptions about what people need, we can ask those we love how we can make their lives richer and more joyful to the very last day. She taught us how we can use the eventuality of death to pull us into the present so that we can experience every moment with the people that we love. And so we can do that for each other as a society that values every member to the last day. And that's the end for this episode. I hope we managed to make it joyful. Thanks to Cathy Thorpe, CEO at Nurse Next Door, and thanks to you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, then we'd love for you to share it with a friend. Perhaps someone you know could benefit from the words said here today. We also love reading your feedback in the form of ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. How to Care is a Vocal Fry Studios production in partnership with Nurse Next Door. The producer is Jay Coburn, with production support from Jenna Ratcliffe. The executive producer is Katie Jensen. See you next time.